Hello my friends, it's the Game Boy Geek here, and today we'll be managing a hospital with patients. We'll be taking in new patients from ambulance deliveries, and they'll need to be healed using various hospital departments and staff. Then we'll be able to discharge them, which will gain us points. Dice Hospital is for 1 to 4 players, plays in 45 to 90 minutes, is for ages 10 and up, and published by Alley Cat Games. Today we'll be doing a rule school, where I'll teach you how to set up and play the game so that you don't have to read the rulebook yourself. Now, I have placed timestamps below me in the description of this video, just in case you want to jump to a specific section of the rules. Without further ado, let's get started. Dice Hospital is for 2 to 4 players, and you're trying to treat patients to finally discharge them from your hospital to get points. You'll be sending nurses to different stations to help treat different dice depending on their value or their color. And once you're able to completely get it past 6, it's discharged and you'll be getting points. But be careful, because at the end of the round, any untreated patients will go down in health. If they ever get below 1, they will unfortunately die, which will be worth minus points at the end of the game. You'll be improving your hospital by adding specialists like surgeons or paramedics, or also adding new rooms to your hospital to help you with specific patients. And you'll be able to draft which ambulance you want to take in. The lower the sicker, the higher the better they are, but the lower the ambulance you take, the better choices you get on those upgrades we just showed. There's also administrators you can have at the beginning of the game that give you special abilities throughout it. There's plenty of variants to add difficulty to the game, but there's also a specific solo game which really changes the mechanisms. Each player is going to get a starting hospital board. You'll place one in front of you. It doesn't matter which one you take or which side you use, they're all the same. Each player will also take 2 identical color player markers. One of them will just stay in front of you. This will help remind everybody what color you are. The other one you'll place on the scoreboard, which you'll locate and place off to the side where everyone can see it so that all the colors are there. This will track players' scores throughout the game. This dial will also count the round numbers during the game, so you'll place it on round number 1. You'll then separate out all the meeples of the different colors into their own piles off to the side, and then each player is going to take 3 of these white ones, which are known as nurses. And you'll place those in the nurses station, which is right in the middle of your hospital board. Feel free to place them standing up. I place them down flat so they're easier to see on camera. Next, in the middle of the table, you'll find and locate and place all of the ambulance. Now, you're going to use a certain amount depending on the number of players. You'll use 1 more than the number of players. In this game, we're playing with 3 players, so 1 more than that is 4, so we'll just remove this 5th ambulance and place it back in the box. But do the same for whatever player count you're playing with, 1 more ambulance than the number of players. You'll also want to make sure that they're in numerical order, left to right from low to high, and that you're using the side that does not have these dice numbers on them. You want them to be empty, just like this. Next, you'll find these department tiles, and you're going to shuffle them up, make a stack, and you're going to flip over a number of these tiles equal to the number of players minus 1. So 1 less than the amount of players. In this case, we're playing with a 3-player game, so there'll be 2 tiles there. These will be off to the side next to the ambulances. Next, you'll go through the cards. They have this on the back. You're going to separate out the 10 hospital administrator cards. They say administrator, and they have a purple banner at the top of those. Each player is going to secretly be dealt 2 of these. They will decide which one to keep. The other one will get removed from the game and placed back in the box. And by the way, these are optional. For your first game, you can feel free to leave these out, but it is going to add to the strategy of the game. Now, for the rest of those specialist cards, you'll shuffle up that deck and you'll deal amount out equal to the number of players minus 1. So there'll be 2 in a 3-player game, for example, but it's always going to be 1 less the amount of players. And these also go near the ambulances. Now, the first player is the one who's recently visited the hospital, and they'll get this first player marker, and this will go right in front of their board to begin the game. Now, when setting up for 2 players, the first player is important because they're going to be able to decide how many of each of these come out. Because if you remember, the amount of tiles in cards is always 1 less than the amount of players. That would be 1 of each, but this is slightly altered for the 2-player setup. For the 2-player setup, that first player is going to decide to either include 1 card and 2 tiles, or the opposite, which would be 2 cards and 1 tile. So how that works is 1 of each will be drawn, and then that player gets to decide whether another card comes out or another tile comes out. So there'll always be 2 of one and one of the other. Place the blood bag and fatality tokens off to the side but in a supply that people can reach. Next, gather up all the dice of the 3 different colors. You're going to end up putting a certain amount of these dice into this bag and possibly removing some based on the player count. In a 4-player game, you'll put all the dice in there. In a 3-player game, you'll remove 3 dice of each color and take them and put them back in the box. You won't need them. The rest of these dice will go in that bag. And if you're playing with 2 players, from all of the dice, you would remove 6 of each color, take these and put them back in the box, and the rest of the supply would go in that bag. Next, each player is going to randomly take 3 dice out of the bag. It's okay if they're all the same color or mixed colors. In this case, I have 3 different colors. You're going to set one of the die to a 3, one of the die to the 4, and one of the dice to the 5. You can decide which one to do, but if it's your first game, don't worry about it. Just set either one to those specific numbers. And you're going to place these into one of your wards. You'll see you have 4 wards, and it doesn't matter which ones you put them in, as long as they're on the top half of the ward where you see those down arrows. And the final thing you'll do in setup is give each player a player aid card. It has the turn sequence and scoring on one side, and it has some iconography and some definitions of those on the back side, and now you're ready to play. The object of the game is to score the most points, and you'll be doing so mainly by treating different patients, raising their values from a lower number to a higher number, and once they get above 6, they will end up getting treated and discharged, and you'll be getting points depending on how many of those you actually get discharged in the same round. The game will last 8 rounds, and each round you'll go through 6 different phases, so let's go through these phases now. Now the first phase is the patient intake phase. Now the first player will draw 3 dice from the bag for each of the ambulances that's out there and roll them like this. So since we have 4 ambulances and there are 3 dice per ambulance, there'll be a total of 12 dice rolled as you see here. However, if you see any 1s and or 6s, all of those dice must be re-rolled and continue to be re-rolled as long as any of them show a 1 or 6. So maybe it looks something like this after we were done rolling. Then the first player is going to take the dice, starting with the lowest numbers and working their way down. They're going to put these on ambulances like this. Now, in this case, there's 3 2s and they all go here, and the next ambulance actually starts with a new value. So they'll start putting these on like this, 3, 3. Now look at this, we have a lot of different 4s. Maybe you can see that any time a single value die is going to be split up between 2 ambulances, the player to the right of the first player, meaning the last player in turn order, gets to decide how these dice are distributed. So instead of it like this, maybe they wanted to swap the red with the green like that. And much like this, there's 4 5s. They get to decide which one goes where. So maybe they want this, and then this, and then this, and then this. Again, it's the player to the right that would decide this. Then the first player is going to get to be able to pick which one of these ambulances they want, but the first player cannot pick the number 1 ambulance. So that first player will pick, let's say it's us, and we pick this one. This will go next to us like that. And then in a clockwise order, all the other players are going to select their ambulance, and there might be, there will always be, 1 ambulance left over, but it might be the number 1, and that's okay. And when this happens, the dice on the leftover ambulance gets put back in the bag, but the ambulance stays right there. Now, whoever took the lowest numbered ambulance will also take one of these blood bag tokens and add it to them right near their player board. These are going to allow them to do different things, but they'll also be worth a point at the end of the game if you don't use them. But keep in mind that it might not always be the number 1 ambulance, because that one may have been the one that was left out with no dice taken. Also keep in mind when selecting these ambulances, the numbers from low to high in ascending order is going to be the turn order for the other phases later in this round. Then you're going to take those dice and put them in any empty spots in any of your wards. It doesn't matter which one, as long as they're going on the upper spots that have a down arrow on them. However, later in the game, there might not be enough available spaces in your hospital to bring these dice in, because remember, they always have to be on the top spot of those different wards. So in this case, we have to place 3 dice, and they can't fit here. Only one of them can, which means these 2 are going to unfortunately die, and it's going to be fatalities. And so here's the 2 dice of the fatalities. They go to your mortuary. Now they don't stay here. These actually go back into the draw bag with all the other dice, but you will get one of these fatality tokens that matches the icon of the mortuary for each of the dice that had fatalities. These are each going to be worth -2 points at the end of the game. But early in the game, this is not likely, so again, you could just place them in the top spot of any of your wards, making sure that all the dice go in the same ward. After that, we move to phase 2, which is the hospital improvement. Now, starting with the player that took the lowest numbered ambulance. Keeping in mind, it might not always be the first numbered ambulance because it may not have been taken. Whoever took the lowest number one would then go in that turn order from lowest numbered ambulance all the way up. They would go and be able to take one of these improvements. Again, one of the tiles or one of these specialist cards. Now, you're only taking one of these. Now, let's say you take one of these tiles. Now, you'll place this tile anywhere you want to around your hospital, but I find it easiest to try to group them with light colors for those specific abilities. However, if you decide to take one of the specialist cards, you would add it just below your hospital next to your administrator, and you would also grab the meeple of that color to track that specialist on the board. And when not being used, you'll always store this on this card to remind you that you have this ability available. Now, these are never replaced at this point in time in the round. And so what's going to happen is the other two players, because we're playing a 3-player game, might go ahead and take what they want as well. After all players have taken an improvement, all players, if they want to, can put one of their improvements back. And if it's a card, it would go to the bottom of this deck. And if it was a tile, it would go to the bottom of this deck. And they would get one blood bag token for doing so. It can even be a card or tile that they just got this round. That's a good way to take something that you think someone else might want, but it won't do a whole lot for you. Also keep in mind that you can have multiple improvements of the same type, whether it's a card or tile. Next, we go to the third phase, which is hospital activation. And this is where each player will activate their hospital to try to heal and discharge as many patients as possible. Now, for your first game, it's recommended that each player individually activates their hospital one at a time so everyone can see how it works and learn from that. However, after that, feel free to do this phase simultaneously, but even with that being said, some groups might prefer to still play in the turn-based order. Choose whichever method is right for your group. So how you activate your hospitals, right now I have 3 nurses and I have my surgeon specialist. And so what you can do is take any of these in any order and place them on one of the departments, activate that in fully, and then continue doing this until all the meeples and or specialists that you've used or wanted to use are done. Now keep in mind that each of my meeples can only be used once per round and each of the departments can only be used once per round. So let's say we take one of these nurses and we place it in the imaging. This says that we can take a 3-pip die or a 4-pip die and heal it by increasing it by 1. That's what the plus sign means. Now, when you heal a die, you will increase it by 1 as it's shown, and then you move it directly below itself to the treated area. So let's do this to this 4. We're going to treat it by making it a 5. And the first time in a round any die is treated, it moves down. This will help track which dice are treated and which ones are not this round. Now, just because it's been treated does not mean you cannot continue to treat it. It'll just stay in the same spot if you continue to treat that patient. But now that I've done this, this meeple cannot move and be activated again this round, nor can the imaging be activated by anybody else. So what I'm going to do is take my red surgeon meeple. It's down here, and I'm going to place it right here. This, by default, is a critical care unit and allows any red die to be healed by 1 pip. So this 5 will now become a 6. However, that came from the surgeon, whose ability is anytime that you increase or heal a red die, it also increases again. Now, 6 is the highest number on the dice, and anytime you go over 6, regardless of how high it would have gone, it gets completely discharged from the hospital and goes to the discharge lounge. This is the main way of getting points in the game. The icons in this game are very clear, and I'm not going to go over all of them in this game. On the very back of the rulebook, there is a reference page that goes over all of the iconography in the game. So let's say for my last 2 actions with my meeples, I'll go to the clinic and I'll make this 5 treated for a 6. So we'll put this yellow one down here and give it a 6. And for my last one, I'll go here to oncology and it can make any yellow die treated again. This 6 again is going to discharge this patient because it's all healed, because it would have been from 6 to a 7, and anything greater than a 6, they go to the discharge lounge. So this round, I was able to discharge 2 patients. Now there's something else you can do in this phase. If you remember, there were ways to get these blood bag tokens and they're worth a point at the end of the game. However, you can use them for two different things during this phase. You can choose to treat any one die on your board with the normal means by putting it down and putting the pip up by one value. So let's say it looked like this and we wanted to treat this die. Well, the red critical care unit's already used and the 4 is already used, but we could use this blood bag token to change this into a yellow die. And to temporarily show this, we can place this in this yellow spot to remind ourselves that this round this die is temporarily yellow. Then we can move this nurse here to now fix or treat a yellow die, which this temporarily is, and it's just like that. And so that's how you would use those different blood bag tokens. Then we go on to phase 4, which is neglected patients. So let's say this is what our board looked like. We had treated some patients, but there were 4 of them that we didn't treat. For each one of these that were not treated, we're going to put down to 1 pip on each of these. So right now we're at 3, 4, 3, 3, and these would become 2, 3, 2, 2. And keep in mind, any dice that you already treated using the blood bags as already shown do not go through this neglect step because they're considered treated. Now, if at any time when you're doing this, let's say this die was a 1 and it was neglected. If it were to go down to a 0, this patient would die. And as I showed before, it goes to the mortuary, it actually goes into the dice bag, but you would get one of these fatality tokens, which again is worth -2 at the end of the game. So here you're trying to strike the balance of taking the higher numbers high enough to discharge, but keeping the lower numbers up so that they do not die. Then we go to phase 5, which is discharge patients. Now we count the amount of patients that we've discharged this round, in this case 2. We look at our player aid and we get that many points. So we've discharged 2, and that would give us 3 points. So we're the red player, so we would now go to 3 points, and all the other players would do this accordingly. Keep in mind you might have some administrators or some cards that allow you to get more points. Like for this says, if you have discharged the most patients, you get an additional point. And when you discharge those patients, you take them from your discharge lounge and put them back in the draw bag with all the other dice. Then you move on to phase 6, which is the shift change. This is sort of a cleanup round. The first thing you do is you move all the nurse meeples back to the nurse's station. Then you take the specialist meeples and place them back on their respective cards. If there were any treated patients, you would move them back up to reset everyone to the top of each of the wards to ensure that they're untreated going into the next round. You would then return all of the ambulances in order from left to right, lowest to highest ascending, to the middle of the table. You would then rotate the round marker and increment it by 1 so you're tracking which round you're going into. You would then take any unclaimed improvements, whether they're tiles or cards, and put them to the bottom of their respective piles. If there's more than one of a type, you randomize which one goes first as you're placing them back on the bottom of the pile. You would then draw the right amount of tiles and cards, 1 less than the amount of players, special rules for 2 players that we talked about earlier, going into the next round. You'll continue through these different rounds, going through all the phases I mentioned, until you get to the end of the 8th round. And in that last round, you skip that shift change phase number 6 because there's no need to set up for the next round. Then each player will add 1 point for each blood bag they have, and -2 points for each fatality token they have, and whoever is highest on the score track at that point is the winner. If it's tied, the player that has the least amount of patients in their hospital would win. If it's still tied, whoever has the highest total numbers adding up all the pips in their hospital wins. If it's still tied, you share the victory. Now there's some optional rules you can play with. Number 1 is the event cards. They look like this. Now you would shuffle this deck up and put it near the middle of the table during setup. Now starting in the second round, meaning you've gone all the way through the 6 phases in the first round, but starting in the second round, right before that first intake phase, you'll flip this event over and it will do something. For example, this says each red patient discharged this round scores 1 additional point. Or maybe it's something like each lowest scoring player can take a die of the lowest value and heal it by 3 steps. So these are different 1-round events that can add a little bit more to the game. Once you've gotten really good at Dice Hospital, you might want to try a more challenging game. There's hard mode. There's different ways that you can make the game more challenging. The first is called Opening Crisis. During setup, and only during setup, each player takes 5 patient dice instead of the 3 that you would take in a normal game, and you set these values to 3, 3, 4, 5, 5. So 2 3s, 1 4, and 2 5s. And you can set this to it in any of the color combinations. Meaning you're still drawing these from the bag randomly, but you can set any of these dice to those specific numbers as long as you have 2 3s, 1 4, and 2 5s. Another variant is the nationwide epidemic. When you bring your ambulance in phase 1, you will take another die randomly from the bag and roll it. If it's a 1 or a 6 like normal, you'll re-roll it. Now you have to bring in 4 patients instead of just 3 into your wards. Another variant is resistant superbug, and during phase 4, which is the neglected patients phase, each patient that was not treated actually will decrease by 2 instead of just 1, which will make it a lot harder. And another variant is called the final round collections, and this simulates other hospitals, not the ones by other players, but they're picking up the remaining patients to treat them. What you'll do is you'll remove the highest numbered ambulance. So we have a 3-player game, and now there's the amount of cards equal to the amount of players. Then you'd flip those ambulances to the other side. Then starting with the first player, each player can take a die that's left over in their wards at the end of the game and place it on the corresponding color and die value. So this is a green 1 or 2. They can place this green 1 or 2 just like that. And each patient placed like this gains you 1 point. Now this continues until all ambulance spaces have been filled or all players have passed because they have no remaining patients in their wards. Because once you have an empty ward, you must pass when it's your turn to place a die here. And then final scoring goes as normal, except now you get -1 point for each patient still in your wards. There is a solo game as well. First of all, you won't use any of the ambulances, nor will you use any of the administrator cards, so you can remove those all from the game. Then, from the drawstring bag that has all of the dice in it, you will remove 10 dice of each color from that bag and remove those dice and place them back in the box. You'll then find the medical report cards. The backside looks like this, and the fronts look like that. You will shuffle them up, and you'll make 2 rows of 3 just like this. Now how these work is in phase 5, discharging patients. Once you've discharged all the patients, you can look to see if you can fulfill any of the medical reports on the bottom row. In this case, if we have discharged a green and a yellow like this, we can get this card like this, and it's going to be worth 2 points there. Now, the one above slides down, and you can now immediately get any of these. And this was a red and green. Good, we can get this one as well for another 2 points just like that. Now, there are some rule changes. In phase 1, there's no ambulances, so you're going to always roll 4 dice. In this intake phase, you're just going to select any 3 of these, and the 4th one that you don't want goes back in the bag. Keep in mind, there can never be a 1 or a 6 here. If there were, you re-roll them until there's not any 1s and 6s. And if the total value of pips is less than 9, like it is here, you take a blood bag token from the supply. Also, at the beginning of phase 2, which is the hospital improvement, you'd reveal 1 specialist card and 1 department tile. You choose either the card or the tile and return the other to the bottom of its stack. Now for the endgame scoring, all the medical reports that you finish get added to your normal score, and you'll still score the discharge patients as normal. But any medical report cards that you did not finish that were still out there get scored against you negatively. So for example, if this one was not completed, you would go down 4 points. You'd do that for face value for all of the medical reports that were incomplete. And if you want to make the game more difficult in this solo version, the fatality penalty, instead of it being -2 points, you could double it to be -4. You could also double the minus points you get from the incomplete medical reports as well. Well, I hope this helped you dive right into Dice Hospital and get to the fun quicker than you normally would if you had to read the rulebook yourself. Now, if you have any further questions about the rules, I've placed a link below me in the description of this video, and that is the best place to ask them. And since I'll be notified, but so will Alley Cat Games, this has been the Game Boy Geek, helping you find and enjoy the next board game you'll love.